All right, and it looks like Spencer will be trying to join soon. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second Rules Advisory Committee meeting for OWEB's Water Acquisition Grant Program. So we've got a meaty agenda today, revisiting some of the revisions we discussed during the first meeting and hopefully making it a little farther into the rule set. So I think we'll go ahead and start with introductions. And it looks like Meg, Kate might be sitting in a waiting room somewhere. So I'll get introductions going and then I'll loop you and Meg on an email string with Kate. She might need another invitation. Okay, so I'm Renee Davis. I'm OWEB's Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager. I have the good fortune of working with Brian on water acquisitions. So I'll go ahead and just go around our Zoom screen, Teams screen, sorry. I'll start with RAC members and then I'll jump over to OWEB staff. So let's see, Steve, great. You've read my mind. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please, name and affiliation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Perrett with the Department of Environmental Quality, and I work in what we call our water integration team.
Right. Thanks for being here, Steve. I know you're operating with some power challenges, but we really appreciate you being on nonetheless. Let's go to Jessica next.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Humphreys. I'm the Oregon Flow Restoration Director with Trout Unlimited.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. Let's see. Well, Kate just popped in, so we solved that tech problem. So, Kate, would you introduce yourself? Just name and affiliation would be great.
Hi, Renee. Sorry, I think I was in rec meeting number 3 already. Yeah, I'm Kate Fitzpatrick with the Deschutes River Conservancy.
All right, good to have you here. You're so excited about that third meeting in January. Jumped right to it. All right, let's go to Corey next.
Corey Kershane, Allocation of Conserved Water Program Coordinator, Water Resources Department.
Great, thanks, Corey. And April?
Good afternoon, April Snell, Executive Director with the Oregon Water Resources Congress, working with irrigation districts.
Great, thank you, April. Shyla?
Shyla Olson, I'm the district manager with Wasco County Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm going to leave my camera off. I've been also having bandwidth issues, and I've got a little bit of a delay, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Shyla. We can hear you just fine, and Meg and I were both commenting on the state system. We're even having a little bit of that today, so no problem at all. We'll go to Spencer. Thanks, Spencer, for patching in.
Yeah, sorry for being late. Spencer Sawaski, I'm the Habitat Division Deputy Administrator at ODFW. Happy to be here.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Now we'll switch over to OWEB staff. So Brian, we'll kick it off with you.
Yeah, hello, everybody. And I'm Brian Walcott, Water Acquisition Grants Program Coordinator and Capacity Grants Program Coordinator.
And Taylor.
Taylor Larson, I'm the Oregon Ag Heritage Program Coordinator and here to take some notes.
Thank you. Meg.
Hi, I'm Meg Birchfield. I'm with OWEB. I'm a grant support specialist and I'm here in a technical advisory capacity. So if there's anything that goes wrong, I'm your person. I'm going to go off camera and mute my mic.
Great. Thanks, Meg. And last but not least, Eric.
Good afternoon, everyone. Eric Hartstein, Senior Policy Coordinator. Good to see you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And just a note, so Kaylin Barter and Anton Kiono were not able to make this meeting. We've reached out to them. We'll be following up with them to do a debrief after they both are back and available. And then hopefully we'll look forward to a full RAC committee meeting in January. It looks like at this point, knock wood, schedules are working out so that we'll have everyone on board. So I'll do a very quick review of the agenda, and then I think Hartstein, I'll hand it over for any public comments if we have them. So again, we'll start off with public comment. Then we'll spend about an hour or so reviewing and discussing the revisions that were incorporated into the rule set that was circulated to you earlier this week based on the discussion at our first RAC meeting. So that goes through the 0190 section. So we made some pretty good progress, but definitely want to be able to talk through some of those red lines that you're seeing and ensure that we are hitting the mark. And then hopefully we can transition into ideally the remainder of the rule set. So working hopefully through the final section 0230. And if we don't get that far, it's okay. We can pick that up at the next meeting. So I think maybe let's do, we are holding a little bit of time. If others join later, if other members of the public who are interested join later, we will hold a little bit of time if needed to add another public comment period in, but if not, we'll utilize as much time as possible to get us through as far as we can in the rule set, and then we'll spend about 10 or 15 minutes at the end just talking about next steps and looking forward to that January meeting, because we'll have some substantive conversations about some very important issues at that meeting. So I think with that, Eric Hartstein, do you want to take the public comment process?
Sure. So we did not have any written public comment submitted in advance of this RAC meeting. If we did, we would be sure to send it out to all the RAC members in advance. But now is the time for verbal public comment, and I do see we have some folks online. So if you do want to provide that verbal public comment, can you please raise your Teams hand? Okay, not seeing any hands raised. As Renee said, we will have, if time allows, a second public comment period at the end of this meeting, which will provide another opportunity for comments if some arise. So thank you. Back to you, Renee.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so just quick run of show. So I will touch on a few topics up front and then flag where there maybe are some pending items that we had talked about at the first meeting that we haven't quite gotten to. Then I will turn it over to Brian and we will walk through the markups. Taylor will be sharing his screen and diligently taking additional notes as needed if there are things that you all identify close to the mark, but not quite there in terms of revisions or if other things pop. So just know that we'll be in screen sharing mode. We'll be keeping track of if folks are raising hands, but recognizing even though this is an official public meeting, it's fairly informal. So if for some reason, we're not seeing that you have a comment, just feel free to jump in as needed. So in terms of just some overarching issues from the first RAC meeting, had some really important topics raised during that meeting. One was the concept of what I'm describing as groundwater dependent ecosystem. So just connecting this rule set to, is there an interplay here between in-stream flow and groundwater resources? If so, what does that look like relative to the constitutional intent around native fish and wildlife habitat? So I think we'll potentially touch on that a little bit today during the RAC meeting, but definitely want to hold some time at that January meeting to dig in more to that, given that at least a few of you have been on multiple RACs, so may have as much history as Eric Hartstein and I do. So that'll be an important topic to talk through. Did hear some questions about certainly interest in and support for continued eligibility for irrigation efficiency and irrigation modernization projects through this program, but recognizing that maybe the rules currently don't reflect exactly how those projects are different from maybe a traditional or more traditional lease or transfer project. So just making sure if that is an eligible type of activity through this program, that the rules reflect that. Had already some conversations about the importance of having what I would call programmatic costs and some potential support for that through this program. So we did have some kind of evolution of the rules through the last few rulemaking. So just know that that is something we have a pin in. We expect that'll be a topic we have deeper conversation on in January. Otherwise, I think we did a pretty fair job of being able to make some first attempts at revisions to the rules on topics you raised. Did want to flag there were a few topics that came up. For example, Steve, I think it was you asked about mitigation and the space for interplay for mitigation here. So we can give an update. There's just a connection back to OWEB's mitigation policy there that we would want to make sure we align with. And then we did, several folks flagged the topic of monitoring and what makes sense in terms of monitoring requirements for this program. So we haven't gotten to that section of the rule in a significant way. So hopefully today we can start to tackle some of that and talk in more detail about what ensures accountability and what might be too much or maybe not hitting the right mark in terms of monitoring. And then we did talk a little bit about the connection to other, or briefly touched on connection to other OWEB rule divisions. So Division 5, which is our overarching grant program division, and then Division 10 restoration. And if there might be some relevant pieces from those to borrow for infrastructure, irrigation efficiency, and modernization projects. So we can talk a little bit about that. So I think that covers it in terms of things we all talked about. There have been a few other topics that have come to us. So some emerging issues like water protection across state lines, creating space for tribally significant species to be recognized or addressed as part of this. So I think that through time, we'll just continue to hear about and create space for conversations on those topics. But I'll stop and see, Brian, is there anything in terms of kind of big topics that are either pending or newer ones that have come in that you want to share with the full RAC before we start the rule walkthrough?
No, I think you covered some of the larger issues that have come up so far.
Okay. So RAC members, any questions, thoughts about any of what I just summarized, or any new issues that have come to mind for you you want to get on the table before we start the walkthrough of the rules? Okay. Seeing none, then Brian, I will turn it over to you and Taylor for the walkthrough of the markups, and I'll be keeping an eye again on raised hands, but feel free, RAC members, to just chime in if we're not getting to you and you have a comment.
Well, Taylor's going to share his screen, so we'll be able to see the edited version of the rules showing potential changes and comments that help to describe those. And I'll be trying to work steadily through these today, but as Renee just mentioned, feel free to raise your hand or interject if there's something that needs to be covered that I move through too quickly. And yeah, we can go ahead and get started.
I want to do a quick check. Can folks see that, knowing you can control your own Zoom and Teams in the bottom left corner, but would it be helpful for folks if Taylor zoomed in a little bit more? Okay, yeah, thanks, Taylor. All right. If anyone has issues, speak now, or otherwise we'll assume you're using your own Zoom or Zoom in, Zoom out functionality. Okay, thanks, Brian.
You can also pop it out and do a separate window if that's helpful for folks.
Thanks, Spencer. We'll take all of the team's experience that we can on these meetings. So if you have tips of the trade, definitely share them. All right, go ahead, Brian.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll go ahead and start at the top. And there has been discussion about a potential name change for the program, and as an alternative to water acquisition grants, could we consider the term water transaction grants? Just a terminology change. And we said at the last meeting that we would look into that as OWEB staff. And I just pointed out in the comments the constitutional language that states acquire from willing owners interest in land or water, and the statutes created use acquiring from willing owners interest in land or water. And so we have acquire, acquire, acquisitions is the terminology that the program started with the passage of the Oregon Plan for Salmon and Watersheds. And the name of the program came from that. And I don't know if there's any further discussion or whether you all think that it might be beneficial to change over to water transactions, which sounds like a more willing exchange of a person's assets versus acquisition might have a little bit different connotation. And just was curious to see how you all feel about that.
And Spencer, I think you may have flagged this for us in your written comments since you weren't able to be at the last meeting. So certainly if there's anything more that you want to add.
No, I guess I just feel that the acquisition isn't always an accurate description of what's going on here. Just as to kind of repeat what Brian said, I feel like in general, the transactions better describe is what we're doing. Sometimes, and this came up with our private forest accord grant program development, a lot of the committee members were under the impression that ODFW was acquiring water rights or land, and that's not the case. And so it can be a little bit misleading.
Yeah, thanks for flagging that. Okay, other thoughts on this topic or strong feelings one way or another about acquisitions versus transactions?
Yes,
Steve,
Steve?
go ahead. Oops, sorry, Brian.
Well, these sort of projects I've heard, called by different things, but I'd be curious what others think. But one phrase that maybe is accepted sort of across the West is environmental water transactions. That would probably be the phrase I would use, environmental water transaction grants. And I think that distinguishes a little bit from non-environmental. It gives the purpose of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. Okay, any other thoughts or flags? Okay.
Not seeing any other discussion on that topic. The next item was just a potential readability fix, and that is with the way that the purpose statement is currently phrased, where it states acquiring from willing sellers interest in water rights, and I propose that we change that to acquire interest in water rights from willing sellers. Just thought it is a bit less awkward. I see some heads nodding.
You got a thumbs up too.
Yeah, and a thumbs up. I don't see any opposition, and I know this is a little bit of a variation from how things are currently phrased in the Constitution and in statutes, but I think it helps clarify the program, and I think it would be helpful. And not seeing any concerns or hands raised.
And on that, just because you mentioned both Constitution and statute in the last couple comments, Brian, we should let everyone know that for all of our rulemakings and all of our rule revisions, as we get towards the end of the process, there is a touch point during which we ask our contact counsel at Department of Justice to review the rule revisions to make sure that we haven't had a situation that kind of deviates such that it's no longer well aligned with intent or our statutory authority. So just know that kind of cross-check or regrounding in statute will happen later in the process. Thanks, Brian. Go ahead.
You know, the next topic is, Renee had mentioned this a little while ago, but just that first flag about the question of creating space for groundwater protections or groundwater dependent ecosystems, where working with groundwater could have a potential impact on surface water improvements for fish and wildlife habitat or water quality. And didn't know if we want to get into a bit of discussion about that now, or should we put that off till January?
I know that we plan to protect at least an hour for some of these bigger topics, but I would say, let's see, Spencer, you weren't, and Kate actually, because we had Jen at the first meeting, correct? Yes. So I don't know if either of you have any initial thoughts about this, since you didn't have the benefit of engaging in that first meeting.
I would just say I look forward to a longer discussion. Had a little chat with some conservation interests about this, and generally I think this is going to be an important tool, but there's so many questions around how you would affect these transactions in a way where you can ensure that the in-stream flow benefit that, and there's maybe some risk to opening it up without all the right assurances in place. And so maybe this is one to leave for the next 5-year review would be my initial thought. But I do think it's going to, like, looking at groundwater and surface water together, you know, and the Deschutes were very much, we do that and we will be doing that more. So I do, you know, want to say this will be an important tool, but I'm not quite sure we would have the right recommendations at this time to hammer it out.
Okay, that's super helpful, Kate. Thank
Open
you.
to others, though. Definitely open in the conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Spencer?
would
Yep.
I would echo Kate's opinion. I think it's a interesting idea, but there are a lot of unknowns, both in terms of gaining confidence in the ability to track that water and definitively connect groundwater, surface water. But I'd want to learn more and think about it.
Okay. All right. That's super helpful. And for anyone who did participate in the first RAC meeting, if you've pondered this issue since our last discussion and have any new thoughts to share, happy to capture those, because it will help to inform the more kind of focused discussion that we tee up for January. So any other thoughts or observations since our last meeting? Okay.
I'll give a couple thoughts or observations. The things that come to my mind are, you know, the proximity or direct connection of the groundwater wells to the spring. That seems like something that we would really need to give some thought to. Is there a direct connection between some groundwater well and a spring? And then sort of goes along with that is, you know, if there's a water transaction that compels a water right holder not to use their groundwater well, you know, they can become subject to forfeiture after 5 years because there's no way to legally protect them, perhaps, while they're doing that through a water use agreement or whatever else. And then the third issue is, yeah, how do you protect that water at a spring or whatever that we're trying to leave in stream or in the lake or wherever it might be? How do we protect that water that we're paying for?
Okay, thanks for those thoughts, Steve. And Corey, and I'm not putting you on the spot to comment on these things, but if at any point you want to just mention, hey, WRD has a process underway, or we have rulemaking in progress, anything like that, just so we make sure to keep strong connection with what our technical expert sister agencies are doing on various topics. And I'll say the same later, I think, of ODFW and DEQ on some of the plans. Okay, Brian, I think we're set with that one. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. And so that gets us through the purpose statement, and then we get into the definition section. And the first definition, I proposed a new definition. Wasn't sure if this is necessary, but there's a lot of references to water rights throughout the program and throughout the rules, and considered putting forward a definition for a water right, referring to a state issued legal authorization to use water under a specific set of terms. And was curious to get feedback or input on whether this might be helpful or necessary to include in the list of definitions.
And Brian, if memory holds, this connects to, I think, some clarification in one of the subsequent sections about, are we talking about just water generally, or are we actually talking about water rights? And so just wanting to try to, I think, be as clear or precise.
Yeah, that is correct.
So now, Corey, I might be putting you on the spot. Any thoughts about this one?
No, not really. I mean, during our last RAC meeting, I made contact with some of you folks might know Jerry Clark. He's been around a long time, and yeah, to his knowledge, we don't have any strong reference to the definition of a water right. There's nothing in rule or statute that we can create that link. And he even let me know that he had asked, some of you folks might know Dwight French, who's now semi-retired, and I didn't get a response back from him yet. I was just trying to look through some of our transfer Division 380 rules. If it talks about water rights, how it's defined in there, but I haven't come across anything yet. I think it, saying water right refers rather than saying water right means, I think that's a good avenue because, by using refers instead of means, you're not, there's no clear definition in rule or statute, right? So you're not laying, here's what water right is, right? So I don't really see an issue with water with what Brian, you're the one that added that, right? The water right definition or the okay. Yeah. I don't see any issue with that.
Thanks for that, all that legwork, Corey. And I think just keep us posted. This is one that I think Brian and Eric Hartstein will probably want to flag for DOJ during that subsequent review, just to make sure that we stay out of another agency's lane by not inadvertently defining something that isn't defined already by the regulating agency. But at this point, we're open to adding this if it seems like it would be helpful clarification given some of the subsequent sections of the rules.
Right. Well, the next topic is further down in the definitions, number 2, where there's a new attempt at a definition for conserved water. And this was developed in coordination with staff at Water Resources Department, Corey and Sarah, or Corey specifically for this one, since she manages the conserved water program. But that's the language that we're proposing to better define a project that conserves water pursuant to Oregon's Conserved Water Act and uses the allocation of conserved water program. Kate?
Yeah, thanks. I missed, sorry that I don't have the benefit of the last conversation. I know it's sprinkled throughout this on making sure that this alternate pathway in the Deschutes is eligible too. So I just wonder if that definition needs to be inclusive of that, or is it covered in other places in the document that there's another state process?
Yeah, we did discuss, or after the last meeting, I discussed with staff at Water Resources Department the Deschutes alternative pathway, and it sounded like that was a better fit under the water use agreement. definition,
Okay.
which you'll see, we'll get to that later with number 12.
Okay, great.
And
Thanks. Sorry to
so,
jump the gun.
yeah, so I think this item number 2 would be specific to the conserved water program. And Spencer?
Sorry, I'm going back one on the water right definition. I did find something in WRD's definitions for a water right subject to transfer. I was going to include it in the meeting chat, but it looks like it's disabled. It might have some relevant information in there that you could use for the water right definition.
Spencer, could you just maybe email Brian and me
Yeah,
the
happy to.
statute or rule? Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, thanks for looking that up. But getting back to the conserved water project, any further comments or concerns related to that potential rule change? Not seeing any. And then there's a comment off to the side related to that topic. And it's just something to consider adding if OWEB monies fund a conserved water project through the allocation of conserved water program, the priority date of the in-stream water right must be equal to the priority date of the underlying consumptive water use right that would remain as an out-of-stream use. And right now with that program, the water right holder has the option to assign that portion of the conserved water either the same date or a date that's 1 minute junior to what they're continuing to use out of stream as that new water right certificate's issued for the in-stream water right. And this was just a potential change. Another option, instead of having this in rule, we could put into the water acquisition guidance for applicants to consider those priority dates as a way to make their application more competitive as it makes it through the criteria process. So that could be a way to address that. And Corey, since I was speaking to your program, I wanted to make sure I described it accurately, the options available to the water right holder.
Yes, that's correct. The option is to keep it the same or go 1 minute junior. But because of my rules, allow them to make that option. I don't know. I think I might feel a little bit more comfortable that it might, like you just suggested, to do it under guidance to make their application more competitive. I mean, because it is an option, but then again, they are getting funding from OWEB, so I don't want to eliminate that option if it's not tied to funds through my rules, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thanks. Kate?
Yeah, this one we would very much support putting it in rule just because, and there are many cases where if it's 1 minute junior, it will not achieve the in-stream benefit that's stated because it won't be reliable, and that's with that same priority date. Unless there was a way to really so we would prefer to have this in rule. As practitioners, we only do projects that use the same priority date. So it would actually make our lives easier as well as far as negotiating with landowners if under the OWEB specific funds, and I understand the state funds has a different framework, but if OWEB funds are geared specifically towards that in-stream fish and wildlife benefit, then this would be the way to assure that benefit.
Thanks. It's good input. Any Any other input on this? Not seeing any, and but just something to consider, and we could certainly discuss it again at the next RAC meeting. But then Kate, go ahead. I think I see your hand up. Oh, okay. The next edit was just trying to clarify the rule set when we're referring to Oregon Water Resources Department. In some places we had abbreviations or just the department. And so we're just making sure that that's spelled out or written out. And so we'll see a few of those as we work through the definitions. The next topic is the split season use in-stream lease, and there was a comment on that at the last meeting as to whether we needed to alter or expand on that for the new legislation that had passed for split rate, split duty in-stream leasing. And what we're proposing is to leave the split season use in-stream lease as it is and create a new definition, number 9, for split rate, split duty in-stream leasing. And then also you'll see in the comment box, there was discussion also about bringing in a new definition specific to the Deschutes Basin Surface Water Bank legislation that just passed. And I think since that the rules are still being developed for that program by Water Resources Department, I think the current thought is we potentially leave the Deschutes Water Bank out of the rule set definitions and just focus for now on the new split rate, split duty and stream lease program. And you can see the definition there, and that's pulled right out of the wording that Water Resources Department or the legislation had in place. I did get input from Water Resources Department staff on the wording of that definition.
So I think, Brian, part of what you're saying is because we don't want to get out ahead of WRD in development of their rules for this, we wouldn't specifically reference the new space for the water bank here, and it should potentially still have space also under the water use agreement definition in addition to the alternative pathway that you and Kate discussed earlier.
Yeah, and that's certainly one option, or we could try to craft a definition specific to the Deschutes Basin Surface Water Bank. I'm curious to hear what Kate might think as you all are fine-tuning that program and rolling it out.
Yeah, it's a great question. As long as we could do it under the water use umbrella, but I think it will end up as a department lease. And I don't think it's going through official department rulemaking as far as I understand it. It's going through, it's pretty well laid out with sideboards in the statute, and then we'll submit an annual operating plan and a charter to the department to walk through how that happens, is my understanding. I might have that wrong. So if it feels too vague at this point, as long as we could still potentially fund something that the state agreed to under that 3806, then I think we're comfortable with that.
Okay, thanks.
So that's helpful to know. Corey, is this you? Is this someone else?
That would be Sarah Henderson.
Okay, so maybe Brian, let's follow up with Sarah, because if it is not subject to an active rulemaking, then we should revisit what the best approach is if it is going to end up being a lease and there isn't going to be there doesn't need to be a rulemaking to enable it on the WRD end.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, and then the next topic you see there, the old number 9 that is crossed out, deleted, and that was a reference to the technical review teams and just the definition of that team that's assembled to review applications when they come in, and hearing from Eric that manages the our rulemaking inform me that this, along with some other items we'll get to later, are covered in a overarching division that talks about OWEB grants. And Eric, I didn't know if you wanted to refer to that now.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And that's, you're referring to Division 5, which is the umbrella rule set that kind of oversees all of OWEB's rules. So we took out the definition here for technical review teams as that is defined in the Division 5 rules, and just want to reduce redundancy here.
Thanks, Eric. And then I don't see any questions or hands up about that. The next topic is 10B, where we just clarified the language where it refers, or in 10, where it refers to Oregon Water Resources Department. And you'll see that spelled out now in both 10 and 10B. And I believe that gets us through the end of the definition section, and just wanted to see if there are any comments or topics you think that we're not covering as we establish definitions for the program or update those.
Sorry, just to, now that I'm looking at the number 12 that you referenced earlier for the alternate pathway, just want to make sure that that alternate pathway will fit in here, because it will be, the in-stream protection will be well, never mind, the state's still working through exactly the mechanism, so it will fall, I guess it would fall, I mean, there's a chance it ends up as a state, not just a private agreement, but a state administrative process. It's not exactly like a private contractual agreement. And maybe we could just sidebar with Corey and Sarah Henderson and make sure that we're covered in one of these places with the current language.
Yeah, that when you bring that up, it makes me think about the alternative pathway being a contract between the irrigation districts. And I don't think that a potential applicant like Deschutes Resources River Conservancy may not actually hold a contract with the water right holder in the Deschutes pathway.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated pathway where there is a contract between the districts, but there's also a state involved piece on the protection in stream. It's a kind of a two-part pathway.
Mhm.
So again, I think maybe if we sidebarred with OWRD to make sure we got that right, and then they are still, we're still kind of at the end, hopefully at the end, but mid-process, sorting out how all those details will look administratively with the state.
Okay. Yeah, and when I look at the current definition for 12, it makes me wonder about just changing that first line, saying a water use agreement means a contractual agreement between water right holders and an eligible grant applicant. And but anyway, I think we should put a note in that we'll have a look at that and might come up with a variation on it for January. Or Renee, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's great. Let's follow up with WRD. I think what Kate is flagging, I think there is space, and sometimes words are very important in administrative rules. So let's do our homework with WRD, and this may be one also, Brian, where we ask our contact counsel to connect with WRD's contact counsel in rule review.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, before we move on to the next section, and Thank you, April. I was actually going to ask, I was hoping, April, you would ponder a little bit the priority date comment, because this is one that feels like it might matter to some of your folks. I think certainly, Jess, when I think about some of the irrigation efficiency projects that TU has brought in, just interested in if you have any thoughts on the priority date comment. Yeah, go ahead, April.
Well, I was going to comment on another part. So, which one specifically were you asking about, Renee? Which items, so I can make sure?
Yeah. So if you go back up to, so in the PDF of the rules, it's on page 2, I believe it is. No, it's page 1, sorry. There's a comment associated with the conserved water number 2 definition. So I don't know, Taylor, if you can scroll up, and the comment talks about equal and priority date of the underlying consumptive use. So there's no edit specifically on this per se, but it was captured as a comment that we had heard the concept of a 1 minute junior to ensure that environmental benefit.
Yeah, so that is one that I'll ponder some more, and reflecting on that conversation that, gosh, it's been over a month ago and lots happened there. Thinking about that, because I do think, and I mentioned this during the last meeting, it's important to make sure that while we're updating the rules, that we're not along the way causing some issues that make this program more difficult, because I think it's something we want more folks to be able to use this, and it is something where words really do matter. So I'll ponder that one, because I do think there was some concern, and I need to check with some folks, because I think it's also that while we've talked a bit about the Deschutes today and we have the Walla Walla, each basin has its kind of own flavor in how they look at these. But on the part that we were just there on the water use agreement, it sounds like we'll have some language in January that'll perhaps have some additional discussion to it. But I do think the way that it's worded currently does mimic current law, and making sure that there is that agreement between the water right holder and the applicant to both make sure that the water is conserved, but also that the different conditions are satisfied, which can have impacts to out of stream folks as well. But I do think, I know Anton isn't able to be on the call today, but I think particularly since we have legislation that came out of the session specific to the Deschutes and the Walla Walla, is seeing how much we can address, tweak, modify the definitions to encompass that universe. But I think on the same token, those are both pilot programs, and I think one is a little bit different than the other. But I wouldn't want us to make a whole bunch of changes for something that is bluntly a temporary thing that may or may not work out. So I think we just need to keep that in mind, and especially when it comes to things in the Deschutes, there's a lot of complications there, as Kate is well aware. But this is something where we just had our annual conference week before last, but this had come up in talking to some of our folks in legal counsel. So I do anticipate that we'll be able to get you some more specific feedback on particularly the definitions. But it's a long way of me saying I think I'm open to suggestions and things we can tweak, but I think we need to just make sure we don't upset other things along the way. And then my last thought, and I couldn't remember from last time, is do we have anybody from Freshwater Trust that's participating on the RAC? But we do have TU represented, right? And I only mention that because, and I think TU has been doing more of the split season, the traditional split season in lieu of Freshwater Trust. But those are the ones, the water use agreements, that I'm more familiar with. And so I think just, again, making sure that we're not doing anything that's going to upend existing projects or arrangements at the same time we're trying to facilitate there being more in the future.
Super. Thanks for all of that, April. Very helpful. So we'll add that to kind of the list of meaty topics for January. And when we give Anton an update, we'll just give him a heads up about this. And I think just to be clear, my understanding is the Freshwater Trust has nearly entirely, if not entirely, transitioned out of water transactions, water acquisition. So, and my understanding is TU has inherited a number of those. So Jess, if you have any early thoughts about April's comments or any of the other definitions, do let us know.
And I guess I'll just add, because my brain was only partially working when I was talking, is that the split season, at the last time we had a rack on this issue, split season was still a pilot, and now it's a permanent program. And so it's not my thing. I've only been more involved when the legislation came up. It's something we're supportive of, obviously, but since it's now permanent, do we need to do something here that helps there?
Thanks, April. Jess, I think I saw you come on camera, but now I've lost you. Yeah, go ahead.
To the split season lease point, I think we have that covered maybe further up than I'm seeing on the screen.
Yeah, number 8.
In number 8, and it has it defined just like an acquisition or a time limited transfer now that it is permanent. And then in terms of other contractual agreements that we do, I think, for us that we do some forbearance, we do some minimum flow agreement type, and I do feel like, from what I can tell, that's covered in number 12 there, the agreement between a water right holder and eligible grant applicant. And just Renee, just because I think you mentioned it as part of that discussion. And I think you've mentioned we'll talk about it more in January, but we are definitely also very interested in the conversation around the priority date with conserved water. And I don't need to reiterate what Kate said, because I think she said it well, but we definitely agree with that it's important and appropriate, and look forward to talking about it more. And we do have several projects where we have used the same priority date for the conserved water portion as the on-farm portion. So yeah, just look forward to talking about that more, it sounds like, in January.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, who knew definitions would be so exciting, folks? We've spent a lot of time on definitions, but it's a good time spent. So, Ryan, you want to move us forward?
Yeah, we're now into the eligibility section, and there was a comment specific to eligibility, and that's where we considered adding an application requirement section similar to the restoration grants program at OWEB for irrigation efficiency and delivery modernization, allocation of conserved water program projects. That those types of projects, unlike other water acquisition projects that OWEB funds, involve an on-the-ground construction element where permits are required, land use forms are required. There's a need for an ongoing operations and maintenance plan for infrastructure that the state invests in. And so we thought about putting that in, but Eric had said, well, all that is covered, all those requirements are covered under the Division 5 rules that Eric referred to a little while ago. So there's not really need for that. But then there has been discussion about just confirming that infrastructure-based projects are clearly eligible within the water acquisition grants program, and that Renee has been doing some follow-up discussions about that. And Renee didn't know if you wanted to discuss any of that.
Yeah, I can just give a brief update. So the determination was made several years ago, I think, when we had our first irrigation efficiency projects come in the door. They were utilizing allocation of conserved water. You know, the rules were written for something different. And, you know, we believe there's space for this, given that there are permanent protections provided and needing to cross-check that. And so this is, I would describe more than anything, just kind of closing the loop on past determination that was made, so that it's clear we have documentation that, yes, that's an eligible use, knowing it needs to meet a water conservation bar that has a benefit for native fish and wildlife species. And then really just working with you all, I think to April's point, we're not interested in making the rule set more cumbersome or lengthier than necessary. And also, if we still, during the last update in 2019, 2020, we're applying a lens that was mostly kind of traditional leases and transfers, is there anything more that you all think we really should capture around infrastructure projects? You know, not unnecessarily pulling over language from other divisions like our Division 5 that we can rely on, but if you feel like there are certain things where, you know, cost benefit is an especially important consideration with infrastructure projects, or understanding what that monitoring process looks like. Just creating space for those projects, but appropriately capturing if there are some nuances that require a little bit different, either information coming in the door at application or follow-up post-award work.
Thanks, Renee. So the current eligibility is, as Renee stated, is fairly brief, but it just specifies that projects need to address habitats and species as determined by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife or by other federal or tribal fish and wildlife agencies, or that they improve water quality as determined by Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. And then there's another portion of eligibility that the board will only consider projects where written notice is provided to irrigation districts if a project is within the boundary of an irrigation district. So that's the current eligibility section. So if there aren't any questions or comments on that, then we'll move on to the next section, which is use of grant funds.
Hey, this is Steve here. Hey, back to that. It caught my eye that it says the board will only consider projects involving legal water rights not subject to forfeiture. I just wonder, is that the right phrase, or should the phrase be water rights that are subject to transfer? And I don't exactly know the difference between the two, but there are distinct legal phrases there.
Yeah, I wonder if both of them should be included in the same sentence. Not subject to forfeiture, meaning that these are water rights that have been used, and then the other part being that they are able to be transferred, and in this case for the program, to an in-stream water right.
Yeah, I'm curious what others think, but we might want to contemplate the best way to word that.
April, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be curious what we come back with. I think the way it's worded is probably the best way, as far as legal water rights not subject to forfeiture that will result in legally or contractually protected in-stream flows. Because I think, well, I guess a couple thoughts is, let me turn my camera on so I'm not just a box here, that if it's through a water use agreement, that's not going to be resulting in an in-stream water right in the same way. So I don't know if we would want to make that overly specific there. But the other part that I'll mention is the Water Resources Department is doing a very large rulemaking where they're tinkering with a number of things, and it may not all be going forward, but they're doing different, some of it related to transfers. So I don't think we would want to lift something from their rules that may be subject to change in the next few months or so. But maybe the DOJ people might have a thought on it. But just chiming in that I think the way it is probably, at least the first part makes sense. Whether or not we need to add something besides the legally part is always, it's kind of weird. Like that does seem like it should refer to a legal in-stream water right or a contractually protected under a water use agreement. But then I feel like I'm just adding a whole bunch of words and that doesn't necessarily help. So that's my thought on that. And then I think also on this section, the language that ensures that if it's a project within a irrigation district boundary, that the districts get notice for that. That was really important to our folks during the previous rulemaking, and am not proposing that we make any changes to that, but just wanted to highlight that that remains an important component, and is also making sure that there's not inadvertent agreements or transfers of water rights that are held by districts versus individual patrons. Thank you.
Hey, April, do you know what the time frame is for the WRD rulemaking? I'm wondering if we're going to be aligned or off timing.
Yeah, so the rules are supposed to come out for public comment by the end of the month.
Oh, great.
And there's 18 different rule divisions currently involved, but I've heard from the grapevine that may get narrowed. But yeah, so there'll be some time before the next meeting to maybe see where things are, and not like Corey needs something else to do there. But I think it was more of just, if there's something there we can use, great. And if not, maybe we just work with what you guys have there.
Great. Thank you for that.
And I just wanted to respond to one item, April, that you had mentioned on that first eligibility item, where it talks about resulting in legally or contractually protected in-stream flows. I think when OWEB is funding a water use agreement, that would fit into that contractually protected in-stream flow category. And the legally would refer to an in-stream transfer or an in-stream lease. So that's how I've interpreted that as a catch-all for the different types of projects that OWEB funds.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, moving on then to the use of grant funds. There is a comment associated with just that title, and that's again getting to the considering that we add the cost of irrigation efficiency upgrade projects, and we do have a new section in there, number 2, that refers to that. And I'm just looking through that comment, see that comment box to see if there's any other items in there we need to refer to. And it looks like it's all just referring to infrastructure projects such as irrigation efficiency or conveyance efficiency or modernization of piping ditches and canals. And I believe, or I have a first attempt at capturing that in item number 2. And you all can read that and see if you think that fits and covers what we have been doing with our program and funding irrigation efficiency and covering the cost of that work, both the parts and the installation labor, and ensuring that water saved is going through the allocation of conserved water program at Water Resources Department. Kate?
Sorry to be such a problem child in the Deschutes. Again, just the alternate pathway is really the equivalent of the conserved water allocation of conserved water program, but yet we can't use that, so it will be a different pathway. So just making sure that we're also eligible when it's conveyance and efficiency projects in this section too.
Thanks for that comment, Kate. Yeah, that makes me think about a possible rewording or another item added to this section.
Spencer, go ahead.
Just a minor thing. Should fees associated with design be included in 2?
Yeah. I think that could be a potential cost.
Yeah, that one and Heartseed, I might lean on you a little bit here because I think this, Spencer, you started taking us into this project specific versus kind of programmatic. Because I think the question, I guess, is your question related to if someone develop designs to be able to come in with a grant application that sufficiently described their work. Is that what you're thinking? Because I think that is part of the rub is they have to be able to talk about design at some level. I'm not saying, I think probably 90% is ideal, but it might be lower level design than that, but they need something to be able to come in the door. And I think that's a little bit of the rub of like, we don't have a perfect answer for a design build project at present. But Hartstein, I'm going to lean on you a little bit, given especially some of the way that the FIP projects have been structured, and also that I think we have the 18-month look back in this rule set. But Spencer, are you thinking like, yeah, they would have done it to even submit a grant application to OWEB?
I was just thinking all of the above, either the basic design or the detailed upon implementation. I mean, there's a fee associated with that. I wasn't really contemplating the timing of it, unfortunately.
Okay. Hartstein, any insights from you want to share now, or do you want to go? We can go to April and then see if you have anything.
Yeah.
April, go ahead.
So a couple things. One, with this suggestion there, I'm wondering if design could fit under 5, since it would seem to be similar to other kinds of due diligence activities. That's just a thought spitball in there. But the other comment that I had, or question, and it feels kind of odd for me to be doing this, but have you guys determined whether or not you can do this and what limitations there would be? And what keeps coming in my mind is, in the past with other types of projects, it had come up where you guys couldn't necessarily fund pivot sprinklers because those could be removed and they're not permanent. So that discussion that I've had with folks in the past was running through my head when I was looking at the proposed 2, which, to be clear, we'd be supportive of those types of things being allowable. I just want to make sure that as we're going down this path, it's something that's clear that you guys have the ability to do. And then, if it's not, do we need to add some additional caveats or qualifiers as far as what type of equipment are we talking about, or something that ensures that that permanence that I know has been an issue with other types. Does that make sense?
No, that's a good point, April. Thanks. Yeah. And just in the past, when we have had these types of projects come in, we make sure that the grantee understands, the applicant understands that we can only fund the in-ground components, such as a main line, the electrical system coming to the project, the diversion structure. and that they'll need to find other funds for the out of ground components like a pivot.
So
Okay.
after all
Oh,
this is done, we'll have guidance, I'm sure, that will help with that, but thank you for that.
Well, it would be helpful before we jump to Kate and then Eric, and then we'll go back to what Spencer raised. So I do think, April, if you could ponder a little bit how we handle that is some combination of our agency-wide budget guidance provides information about ineligible, eligible based on like, can you pick it up and move it and maybe sell it? You just mentioned guidance. I think part of the question is that an issue that is core enough that it actually warrants being an administrative rule? Because otherwise we would continue to handle it in program guidance and have that paired with our agency budget guidance. But if that has been a real point of confusion for folks, not having clarity in rule, it would be good to hear feedback. And it doesn't have to be now, but just please ponder that. Okay.
I will ponder.
Thank you. Okay. Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm not all that familiar with what those specific budget guidance pieces are, but to me, you're still buying a water rate at the end of the day that happens to be, made available through these infrastructure improvements, but that protection of the water rate is permanent. I guess, well, maybe there's some temporary. I guess it would be different if it's a temporary infrastructure project, but I don't think that's what we're contemplating here. I think we're contemplating permanent. So to that sense, I mean, that in-stream benefit would be secure. Now, whether someone ups and walks away with a pivot seems immaterial because they're still protecting that water in stream in perpetuity. That would be my reaction to that whole question.
Eric Hartstein, any
Yeah.
thoughts to share from BIP experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I know on the design piece, it's obviously really an important consideration here. And I'm wondering if it could, because what we're talking about right now would also be, I think, considered in the project review as well. So something like project readiness. And if a project is really heavy on design and little light on how you're going to get to that protected in-stream water, then it's probably not going to review really well. But I hear the desire to include design as some element of the project.
Yeah, thanks for flagging that, Eric. I do, I think to April's point, I do think some of what Spencer described, maybe all of what Spencer described, could be captured under number 5. And I do think, and Eric Hartstein, I would need to lean on you because I was involved in the 2013, not the 1920 rulemaking. We've lifted a lot of this from land acquisition. These words are very land transaction focused. And so I do wonder if we could massage some of the language in number 5 in a way that helps to create space or more directly state some of what you were flagging, Spencer, on design. But I do think, Hartstein, to your point, like if someone comes in and it's really a design project, it's a TA project, not an on-the-ground implementation project, the review team's probably going to catch that with evaluation criteria that we'll get to. So those are the ideas I had for just kind of better, more clearly creating space for design, but still passing the straight face test of these need to get to on the ground implementation. Spencer, I think I see nodding, but you're far enough away from your camera. I'm not sure.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. All right, Brian, I think we can keep going.
Okay. Yeah, so the next topic is just a terminology change where item 4 talked about the cost of outreach activities, and that's we're proposing to change that to engagement activities, and that's engaging with the water right holder to develop a project. But then this also leads to a much broader discussion about the capacity funding to develop and do broader engagement with a community to get these types of transactions completed on the ground. And I think that's going to be, well, I know that that'll be a topic we'll talk about in more detail in January, but didn't know if there's any further discussion you all want to have about that at this point.
Hey, Jess, a quick question for you. I can't remember if I asked this during the first RAC meeting or if it just crossed my mind and I failed to ask you. It would be helpful, I think, for all of the local partner implementers on the RAC if you could come in January with a sense of kind of what has and hasn't worked from when trying to utilize a TA in an engagement grant offering, just as an example. What just falls through the cracks? Because we did back in the 2013 rules have a little bit more space for what I would describe as programmatic funding. And then I think we definitely, and Hartstein, please correct me as needed, during 1920, there was just a lot more scrutiny, I think, on these things these projects really need to be able to tie to you are getting to on the ground implementation. I don't think it's an either or here. I think there is space to still be able to probably demonstrate with some, programmatic funding. You are getting there. You're setting the stage for that work. I think it's the question of how indirect, how far out are we talking? And I'm hoping that if you all can bring some kind of what's worked, what hasn't, what are the constraints we're still facing to that January meeting, and then we can bring some learnings from like the partnership technical assistance grant program that we have that does offer a little bit more space for things like strategic action planning that still needs to get to on the ground, but it's not just a design for X project like Spencer was talking about. So I think if you can help us understand your experiences, we can bring some learnings from some other offerings. It can be hopefully a really constructive conversation about what is that balance here in terms of eligible use of funds. Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I can bring specific examples from the Rogue Basin for difficulty with ongoing support from TA funds and stakeholder engagement to maintain a program. And then Kate and Jen and I could also talk about what has worked about how the CBWTP program is structured with programmatic funds and project funds. So yes, we can be prepared to share some of that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that'll be really helpful to have that background. But the next topic is item 7, I believe. Let's see, or no, there's actually a comment. Or yeah, it looks like 7. And that was just an adjustment to clarify the language and remove that reference to the Constitution. But I do know we're discussing this at the first RAC meeting. There was questions about the 10% holdback and how that makes it challenging to do longer term monitoring when as the way OWEB operates with a grant, up to 10% of the grant payment will be held until the project is completed and all reporting and wrap-up materials are submitted to OWEB. Then there's that final payment of the final 10%. And that has apparently made it problematic at times with trying to do the required post-project monitoring. And I think that's what the question was getting at. But I will add that OWEB does provide flexibility of providing up to 10% holdback. So it doesn't have to be that full 10% of the cost of a grant. But Eric, it looked like you had something you wanted to share.
Yeah, you just said it, Brian. And that this is a relatively new development in that it used to be a straight 10% holdback. And last year or so, that rule was revised to say up to 10% for this very purpose, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on that point, that, like Eric said, it can be up to 10%, but it can be less. And that would certainly take care of this issue we discussed, at least from my perspective. But at what point, like, as the applicant, can we just ask that for less than 10% or a certain percentage? Or, for example, usually this issue comes up because there's like a water payment associated with it that we have to pay out to a landowner. And then we need to be able to recoup those costs, and not sit on them until out year monitoring is done. So are we allowed to just ask for that in the contracts? A lesser percentage or a percentage held back that excludes the water payment amount or something like that? Because if we can deal with it like that, then I don't know that there's any need in the rules to make any adjustments. Just as long as applicants are aware that that's an option, the 10% can be discussed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Hart,
absolutely.
I was going to ask, how has it worked in that?
It's been kind of that discussion prior to executing the grant agreement, because that's where that language is found. So just be sure to reach out to your web project manager if it's going to be one of these types of projects where 10% is going to be problematic.
Great.
So I think, Brian, what we'll want to do is just articulate in guidance something about the holdback amount being determined on a project by project basis, because each one has a different structure and budgetary realities. So we can work on that.
Okay.
And I want to note we're supposed to take a break in 2 minutes. So I think, Brian, we can wrap up this section in 2 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, that's the last proposed changes that I see in the use of grant fund section, but wanted to see if there are any other questions or comments or concerns. Or Renee, were you trying to get through the matching contribution section?
No, I think let's go ahead and take a break.
Mm-hmm.
As a type A facilitator, I always think, wow, we haven't even gotten to the new stuff. And Eric Hartstein always calms me down in these RAC discussions. So it's fine for us to go ahead and take we had 15 minutes allotted. Happy to do 15-minute break. If folks want to do 10, that's fine too. So strong feelings about 10 versus 15, because otherwise we'll come back at 3:45 and then we'll pick up again with matching contributions.
Happy to do 10 if that works for folks.
10. So, okay. Okay. We'll see you back here at 3:40. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, folks. We'll give everyone another minute or so. And since we have a moment, Taylor, you're doing an amazing job with note taking. Thank you. And Meg, thank you for the troubleshooting earlier.
Yes.
Brian and I would have been fumbling about with that for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I doubt that.
I don't know that you know me in technology, so thank you.
Of course, I'm going to help.
Okay, so I think we'll pick it up now at matching contributions, Brian. Sound good?
Yeah, great. Yeah, the first comment that came in related to matching contributions, I believe it was Steve asking about, can mitigation funds be accepted as fund source or as a match funding? And I know currently OWEB grant programs receive match funding from Bonneville Power Administration. Those dollars are mitigation funding for the impact of the 8 dams on the Columbia and Snake River. And so those are mitigation funds that are currently accepted as match. But Steve, I was wondering if you were wondering if there are new mitigation funds that come in through the state, could they come in to help fund this program? Was that the intent of your question?
Well, I forgot the exact intent of my question, but we just want to leave room to where we can either use other mitigation dollars as match or for OWEB to be the recipient and handler of those mitigation funds.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would just say briefly, there are some limitations based on the agency's mitigation policy where if it's basically kind of an acre defined replacement, as an example, for something like wetland impact, then that is not eligible match. And we are not in the business of playing in that kind of acre to acre in-kind mitigation that's very specific, but certainly things like the Pacific Corps Interim Measure 11 funding for the removal of the dams down in Klamath. There was some mitigation funding associated with that, but it was very general in terms of aspirationally, this is what you're supposed to achieve with these dollars. We're administering those funds. So we need to still adhere to the agency mitigation policy that Eric Hartstein's an expert in, and there is some space to situationally dependent to either use it as match or for us to administer those dollars.
Okay. Thanks. The next topic is item 1, and that's just a Eric has been mentioning, and where there's just a reference there about match funding and OWEB for all its grant.
Is it just for me that Brian's
grant
fading
programs.
in and out, or is it for other people too? Okay. So
Okay.
Brian, you're cutting in and out a little bit, so I don't know if it's connection at the office.
I'm not sure. I
Okay.
can turn off my video or screen.
Yeah, maybe let's try that and see if that helps at all.
Yeah. The one, it had specifically talked about a 25% match. The OWEB grant program of match requests. And so that has been adjusted. So match requirements can be set in the announcement for each water acquisition grant offering and not necessarily spell it out in rules. And that's the purpose of that edit change there.
You've started sounding better, and we'll keep you posted if it goes in and out again, okay?
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, and then in 1B, is another proposed change, and that was just clarifying the funding commitments line. And there was a reference to board prescribed processes conducted in cooperation with other funders. And for clarity, we decided to delete that section.
Yeah, and just brief background. So I am trying to remember. Let's see here. Kate, you may have been on that 2013 rack. I'm not remembering. Shyla, maybe you were. We actually had a section of the rules that talked about a board prescribed process, as we were pretty heavily partnering with CBWTP then. And so I think this was just a remaining parenthetical after that section, that board prescribed process was kind of popped out of the rules in 1920. So just it's not to say that we're disinterested in partnering with other funders. It just was an awkward remnant that was still in rule.
Yeah, that makes sense to me because, yeah, there was that kind of partnership with the Basin Water Transaction Program where there had to be some pretty close alignment.
Yep. Thank you for remembering.
You bet.
Are there any questions or comments in this matching contribution section? Not seeing any, so we can move on to the next section, coordinating and partnering with other funders. And Renee, you had wondered whether we need to have this section in there. And, you know, there's certainly coordinating and partnering with other funding that does occur informally. But I know, Spencer, you had brought up a comment. I think you might have been thinking about the private forest accord grant program. So I'm curious to see how you all feel about this.
Yeah, Spencer, do you want to share your thoughts? And then I might lean on you, Eric Hartstein, for a little bit of the revision history that happened in 19 and 20.
Trying to recollect what I said. Sorry.
It was in written comments. I think it was just something in the vein of like, this is a great idea and there could be opportunities since the PFA program is setting up a water acquisition grant program, but I don't recall if it was deeper than that.
I doubt it was. That's probably the extent of it. Just a flag. There's a potential there.
Okay. So Hartstein, there was in that 2019-2020 rulemaking just some of these pieces like the board prescribed process that I just talked about that were pulled out, and we definitely were, I think, still thinking it's important in a resource limited environment, which it always will be for water acquisition, to create space for partnering with other funders. But just how did you all talk about that in the last rulemaking? Because this, I don't know that this gets us a lot farther than just having match contributions, but you probably did want to keep this in for a reason, even though some of those other process pieces came out. Do you remember?
I don't have as good a memory as you do, Renee. So I don't actually. I would probably have to go back and look at some of those revisions that were made along the way back in 1920 to see how this was determined to be kept in, or if we want to keep it in. But yeah, let me go back and look at it.
And I guess in case, like April, you were on that 2019-2020 rack. I think Shyla, you were on that too. If anyone has feedback that they want to share about just history, but also I think just because of the need for matching contributions for OWEB program, we will always have some expectation that there will be partnerships with other funders. I think the intent with this was just a more proactive, I don't want to say formal, but just deliberate coordination where possible, at least with CBWTP. I do think that with the regular coordination we have with NIFWIF and given their role with the Columbia Basin Water Transaction Program, that is kind of happening regardless of if this is in rule, but it would be helpful to hear from you all as RAC members. Like, would you like to have some retained statement about the importance of us trying to proactively, if not integrate fund sources, at least talk to one another? Yeah, Kate, go ahead.
Thanks. This is not well thought out answer, but I will say from the applicant side, we're often applying to multiple funders like OWEB, OWRD in particular. And if you take the case of like the irrigation modernization or water supply grants and loans, you know, and also kind of what we tried with the CBWTP and the efficiencies there is like we're supplying the same information. It's a lot of information. It's highly technical. It requires water rights expertise, economics expertise. If there was a way for agencies and funders to streamline that evaluation, that seems like a lot of efficiency. But again, I know you're all operating under different statutes and different timelines and different pots of funding. So I don't have a concrete recommendation on what's possible there. I just think there's some there, but don't yet have a strong opinion on how it might show up in the rules or not.
Thanks for that, Kate. April, go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to weigh in because you had brought up the previous rulemaking, and my recollection is not as great, except that I do remember when you said Columbia Basin program, and I think Andrew Perkey was on that one back in 2013 when he was still with NIFWIF, which is just indicating how long ago that is. But I do think like there's no problem with what's worded there. I don't have any suggestions on how to kind of improve that, because I think it's both the efficiencies of kind of partnering with other entities, but the other thought I had that maybe works in the evaluation criteria, and again, I've just not had my brain in OWEB stuff recently, but do you guys have the flexibility when you're evaluating projects to give preference points to projects that have that are leveraging other funds or something that kind of gets at that more bang for the buck? And you guys may already have that. It was just something that came up when we were talking about it that I thought I would share.
Yeah, thanks for that. We don't have preference points. We do have and Brian, you can help me. Obviously we have the matching funds requirement, and then I think it's basically like kind of cost benefit, just consideration of given what the environmental benefit will be, consideration of cost. But Brian, you remember the evaluation criteria better than me.
Yeah, you captured it. It would be the cost benefit category, but it also helps to demonstrate an overall project readiness, and that the applicant has come to the application process with other funds or is pursuing other funding.
Yeah, and I think, Kate, to your point, and maybe Brian and Eric and Taylor, we go back on Noodle on this, because I don't want to, especially not without talking to our leadership, say, let's keep something in rule that says, oh, OWEB staff, you're going to take on more responsibility for coordinating across like 5 different other funding programs. And I do think that just the recognition of there aren't a lot of players in this space. And to your point, Kate, we each have our rules, we each have our statutes. We might not be able to merge things, but to the degree we can have some connective tissue, that's not a bad thing to signal in rule. So maybe we can give some more thought to that. And NIFWIF we contract with them and they help us with the evaluation process. And that's been really useful in understanding some of the connection, at least to CBWTP. Yes, Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, just an observation. It seems like these are two pretty distinct things. Here, and we've got coordination with other state agencies for priorities for water quality and fish and wildlife, and then we've got partnering with other funding agencies. I don't know if it warrants breaking those apart, but it seems like, 1 and 2 are really just addressing the coordination with other agencies, and there's not a lot of meat associated with the partnership with other funders.
Yeah, Hartstein, it feels like maybe that mention of we carried forth the mention of the agency and tribal coordination to make sure we were following the rules of the road with constitutional intent, but then we kind of shoved that in to supplement where we had stripped out some things on coordination with other funders maybe. So it's a great catch, Spencer. I think we should consider that. And I think that piece with the technical expertise, I think, is captured somewhere else also in the rules, but I may be misremembering. So we might have redundant content.
Yeah, we do refer to those other agencies when it comes to eligibility, and then we also refer to them in I think in a couple of the criteria where it addresses aquatic habitat or in-stream flow as needs as described by certain agencies.
Okay. So we'll take a bigger look at this, I think, and decide what additional value does having the technical reference piece that you just flagged, Spencer, add. If not, then maybe delete it so long as we don't lose it. And then we'll do some thinking about how we might more accurately reflect the coordination with other funders without over promising something that we might not be able to deliver on. And we'll bring something back for you all to chew on.
Okay. So if that finishes out that section, then we're on to evaluation criteria. And the first proposed change is 1A, and adding in that phrase, including dry year or drought conditions. Or, just expanding on how it would impact or address a flow target. And curious to see if there's any thoughts or ideas on that potential rule change.
Steve, go ahead.
Well, excuse me, the part that caught my eye in that sentence there, and maybe it's in another places, that phrase professionally accepted flow target. I don't know who that is supposed to be referring to. Is that a flow target set by ODFW or a flow target set by, a practitioner out there on the ground? I think we ought to either define it better or something else. But, and then this dry year or drought conditions is pretty vague. Dry year to one person, something else to somebody else. In drought conditions, does that mean that the governor's declared a drought for a certain area or what? So I think that's a little too vague as well.
Well, that first part you get up, Steve, I do wonder about just spelling out Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife determined flow target in place of the word professionally.
I guess I'll weigh in there. We certainly have flow targets all across the state, but I want to acknowledge there are others that do develop flow targets. There are, studies in the Walla Walla, for instance, that are multi-agency efforts, bi-state efforts, and ODFW is certainly not the lead there. So I want to leave a little bit of room there for other non-ODFW targets.
Go ahead, April.
Again, kind of an odd thing to come from me, but just weighing in on the conversation. Maybe there's a way that narrows it to be state or federal fish experts or agencies or something along those lines, because I think Spencer's point is accurate. There could be a flow target that comes from one of the federal agencies that's not an ODF and W target, but still meets the goals.
And I think that fits with another section where we refer to state, federal, or tribally accepted habitat goals or habitat targets.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add the tribal piece. I know it shouldn't be that word flow target is really tricky. I'm thinking about like the habitat conservation plan and the Deschutes. First of all, it's frog, so you need fish and aquatic species. And it was a target set through a voluntary process that exceeds the state water right target. So it was more of a negotiation. You know, in April, I'm happy if you have thoughts here, but leaving that general enough to encompass sort of maybe it's state, federal, and tribally accepted flow targets or supported flow targets or something like that.
Okay. Brian, I'm gonna, oh, okay. So April, do you have your hand back up, or is that a remnant hand up? Okay.
Sorry, that was a legacy hand.
Okay, perfect. So Brian, I am gonna ask this crew the same thing that I talked about with you the other day. So one thing our board has struggled a little bit with is you have a flow target, and please correct anything that I say that's incorrect about this description. And that is that's pretty big and somewhat aspirational. And then you have kind of the reality on the ground of what is actually there. And then you have what a project will contribute to helping move us in the right direction. And sometimes the board will see an application say 1% of the flow target or 0.5% of the flow target. And that's not super helpful for them, or because they're lacking that context. So I think one thing Brian and I talked about is how do we do a better job of helping them understand what these different things mean. But it does make me wonder, seeing flow target stated here, is that sufficient to get at the range of evaluation criteria around ecological outcomes? Like, is there more that we should be describing here? And I know we talk about things like habitat conservation plans or accepted conservation plans and benefits to different life stages, but just, I think the quantitative water number that you're looking for can be a little bit tricky as I reflect on our last 3 board conversations around water acquisition grants. So do you all have thoughts about the content of the evaluation criterion focused on this particular topic? Okay, Kate, then Spencer.
I'm going to cede my time to Spencer, and I'll follow up after him. He's the expert.
That's not fair, Kate. I guess I would say, yeah, there's certainly more information that could help paint the picture of the situation, like the current status of flow, Renee, that you mentioned. I just fear it might muddy the waters even further and become more complicated. The flow targets certainly are not perfect. And I understand their reservation when it's only a small percentage. The way I always pitch it is that each of these flow deals is just an incremental step towards achieving this flow target. Particularly when we're starting in a basin for the first time, they're just sort of setting the foundation. And then look at the things that you can accomplish over time, like in the middle of the chutes. But you've got to start somewhere.
Okay. Thank you, Spencer. Kate?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I agree with Spencer, but I wonder if some language, there's rarely one target, and I know flow ecologists are always trying to get us to change the language. I wonder if something like achieves or helps to support peak or ecological flows identified by state, federal, and tribal agencies or something like that, that paints a broader range of flows that have been identified as ecologically important. And then like the nitty gritty of how far you're getting towards which established flow goals would be more in the application evaluation.
Okay. Thoughts from others? Corey, go ahead.
These are all very, very good points. And not to muddy it even further, Renee, but I'm kind of zeroing in on during the period of use, because one of the reasons for the Deschutes alternative pathway is because of the spotted frog. And so the districts, their period of use is during the irrigation season, and the water that is being protected is during the winter. So if we describe during the period of use, we might be limiting, or keeping out the Deschutes alt pathway applications for consideration, because that's one reason why they can't go through the allocation conserve water program, because we can only protect the water during the season of use. We can't change the season.
I wonder if the use here, does that refer to the in-stream use, which is kind of a funny way to say it, but
That's a great question, Hartstein. Do you remember by any chance?
I don't, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, they've always traditionally aligned with each other, right? So
maybe saying period of proposed benefit?
Corey, would that, is that helpful or complicating for you all if we start monkeying with the period of use terminology, given what you just described about, like, that's a term of art for you all?
It is, and that's a great question. I'm not sure if I could completely answer that question.
Well, we
just
could
scratch all of it. Sorry to interrupt. Can you just remove the during the period of use or benefit?
I don't see an issue with that. Removing during the period of use.
Yeah, Brian, I guess my question would probably be to you, is what that would, without the explicit statement of that, it could either not signal an expectation of a connection to a WRD, administrative process, as an example, or during period of in-stream use, or how did you say it, Kate? Period of proposed benefit. But I think the other subs in this evaluation criterion get at the expectations, and we would just have to be very clear in program guidance in the application. Like, don't bring us a project that really isn't going to make a difference for native species and their in-stream habitat. So, Brian, do you see a downside to deleting that period of use phrase?
No, I think it would be fine to take that out. I think the main thing we need to keep in this line is that this project is improving stream flows in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
I wonder if we should try to come up with, from the comments that we've heard so far, come up with a reworking of this.
Yep.
And present it in January.
Go ahead, Spencer.
Just to quick question on the addition at the end. Is that intended to address issues where maybe the flow target is met during an average or wet year and only not met during a dry or a drought year?
Yeah, I think that was part of the intent, but then also a lot of flow targets, as I understand it, were determined based on historical data and historical record when more recent years have been very different and just to try to capture current conditions.
Okay.
So Spencer, a follow-up question for you on that. With the information that ODFW, have you officially released it yet?
What's that?
The updated in-stream priorities.
No, not yet. We're getting there.
Because I do think, Brian, this question probably came in before that was as close to live as what it is. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that being able to point to that very updated, much more current information could be really helpful, I think, to get at this concern that would have us adding on the dry year drought, possibly. But Brian, what do you think about that?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, we typically want to focus on systems that perennially have an issue with flow, not just during dry or, significant drought conditions. I think we get the biggest bang for our buck when we're focusing on those locations that have continually had low flow issues. They're exacerbated during dry or drought conditions, but they're always there even in a good year.
Yeah. Okay. Any additional thoughts or any different thoughts counter to what Spencer just mentioned? Okay, so yeah, Brian, let's take this back, both the dry year and then the phrasing overall for number 1.
Okay.
And see about some reworking. Okay.
All right. So moving down through the criteria, there in the 1E, there is the addition of end project outcomes in reference to monitoring. So monitoring not only project compliance, but project outcomes as appropriate for the transaction type and duration. It is just a proposed change to that evaluation criteria. And I'm curious to see if there's any feedback on that. And when I think of project compliance, I often think of where there's an in-stream lease or a transfer, and project compliance involves confirming that a field or pasture is not getting irrigated to comply with a lease or a transfer that's in place. And by building in that project outcomes for projects such as an allocation of conserved water or water use agreement, it's a way to capture monitoring that improvement in stream flow.
And Brian, I do think some of this also is being mindful of questions we've gotten about what comes out the other end of these. And the middle Deschutes example is a great one. I mean, when that information was put in front of the board in October, that's very helpful for them to understand what you got through time. So that, I think, just a little bit of thinking in evaluation criteria, the types of questions that we get when the board's deliberating on these projects. Okay, well, no concerns either that or folks are losing steam.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, then I'll try to pick up the pace then. Yeah, so F,
Okay.
the section that referred to climate change, we have some climate change language that in other rule sets, so we removed that. But I just saw a hand up.
Yep, April, go ahead.
I was actually moving into that next section there where it says targets water rights, which I don't want to steal your thunder there, Brian, but I was just thinking maybe I know, at least I think I get the gist of what we're trying to do there, but maybe another word that's not targets, focuses, incentivizes, something that means the same thing, but doesn't have the additional secondary meaning that targets sometimes has from a water user perspective.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
That's a good comment, April. Any other feedback on that?
No, I think because, you know, the intent here is that we do want to incentivize more senior water rights being put in stream to have better projects. And so I think, you know, spelling that out as far as an evaluation criteria makes sense. I am though, and because I did kind of step in as you were gonna explain. So are we just taking out reference to climate change? Or is that appearing elsewhere?
I can pop in here. So our Division 5 rules now include evaluation criteria related to climate change that applies to all of OEB grant programs. So there's 3 specific criteria that are in Division 5 that will apply to these rules as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric.
Yep.
Corey?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a better terminology for wet water. I mean, it's a term that has been kicked around quite a bit around OWRD, but we don't have a set definition. I mean, we know there's wet water and there's paper water. So I'm wondering if there's a better terminology we could put there for wet water.
I think that's a great suggestion, Corey, and we'll need help figuring out what that better terminology is. Does someone have something off the top of their heads that they could even just point us to take a look at? We're happy to do some sleuthing.
I can kick it around at our agency and see if somebody has a better term for it.
Okay. Thank you, Corey.
And I will add that we get at this topic a little bit with the criteria 2 steps down with 2A, the ownership, use, validity, and reliability of the water right. And I think of the reliability as also helping to get at that point. Is this water going to be reliable? If it's wet water, it's much more likely to be reliable than a paper water right. And was curious to just put it out there for those of you that are doing these transactions or have more experience than I do, whether you feel like it's 2A is adequate for getting at that, or should we call out specifically something along the lines of what we have there with that targets water rights of adequate seniority. Kate?
Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, this is when you're describing the benefits, the applicant should be describing that the water's actually there. If it's not reliable, that benefit should not be claimed, or the range of conditions under which it's there should be clear so that the board can evaluate that. So I don't think it's a bad idea to call that out. But ideally, if the process is going as it should, that, you know, the benefits really depend on what that reliability is, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. April?
Yeah, so in thinking about it, I think if the 2A, that does capture part of that new proposed targets water rights, but maybe something that either gets added to the 2A that has the seniority of the water right in relation to other water rights in the system. That may not be the best way of phrasing that, but I think that's, if you're getting at wanting to know whether it's reliable, you know, how often is there real water there, the level of seniority in relation to other water rights in the area might have some benefit. And then I was going to say something about how, like, if you're looking at all water year conditions, wet, average, dry, I think that gets into, you know, how many years or something like that. And I don't know that you could necessarily put that in there, but it's that seniority part that would seem to be otherwise missing from the existing rules. Again, just spitballing as we're getting to the end of our afternoon.
Thanks, April. Spencer?
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind here as part of this discussion is demonstrated past use. It's related to reliability and seniority, but it's distinctly different.
And that's a good point. And you're wondering whether there should be a criteria, a standalone criteria on that?
It's definitely an important consideration as part of the review process.
And I think that's covered in 2A with ownership, use, validity, and reliability. But maybe that should be more clearly defined.
Yeah, Brian, I tend to agree with that last statement that you made. I think use could be read a number of different ways. And so maybe just we could be clearer on that.
So demonstration of past use.
Yeah.
And then the other.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, unless there's some other aspect of use that if we tailor it down to kind of demonstrated past use or something akin to what Spencer was describing, that we would be missing some other kind of use that the TRT and the board, the technical review team and the board should be thinking about. Okay, so it looks like we have Corey, then April.
Yeah, I agree with Spencer, because when we look at paper water and wet water, you know, somebody has a certificate for, say, 100 CFS, but they've only historically diverted 75. That's the wet water. So what remains is the paper water. So, yeah, so maybe changing that, you know, to evaluate historical use in some manner.
Thanks, Corey. Go ahead, April.
Well, I think maybe similar to what Corey was saying, but also different, because I think we need to be careful in making sure we're not setting something up that's not in alignment with current water law. But I was wondering if, as part of this process, does the applicant or do you ask at some point in the process for water use measurement data, or is that something you're able to ask for?
It's done on a project by project basis. There's times that where it's written in as a grant condition that the grantee will document changes in water use, documenting at a pump or diversion structure.
Thank you, because I think that gets at a little bit of the making sure it's real wet water, and irrigation districts are required to measure and report where they take out at diversions. And over the last couple years, the Water Resources Department has got some clearer authority that they can start asking for more reports. But up until recently, and I think even currently with that state, I don't think it would be outside of districts. Not everybody would necessarily be able to provide water use measurement records or reports, but I do think that that's something that I'm trying to think, like, it's something that you guys should be able to ask for. So I'm glad that it's part of something you can do on the grant conditions. I'm just wondering if that would be something that would be helpful in the evaluation criteria, to have that more spelled out, since Renee, as you mentioned, that use under 2A could mean different things to different people.
Yep, thanks for catching that, April. It's great. Okay, so Brian, we have some work to do, it looks like, on both subs 1 and 2 for evaluation criteria. I want to pause for a second. Eric Hartstein, we mentioned that we were open to providing another public comment opportunity. What are your thoughts about timing? I don't think that we'll need more than 5 or 10 minutes for wrap up and looking towards the next meeting. So do we want to set a time for that? And I don't know how many folks we still have on board. It looks like
I think we have at least one. So why don't we say 4:45, if that works for folks. We wrap this up and see if there's any public comments, and then go to wrap up.
Okay. Thanks, Eric.
That work?
Yep. Okay, Brian, go for it.
Yeah, okay. Then in, let's see, 3C, there's been a phrase added there, in addition to a project addressing aquatic habitat and in-stream flow restoration was added in as a additional definer. I think Spencer, I think that might have been a comment from you to put that in there. And I think that would also help to cover where the eligibility of the program depends on addressing fish and wildlife habitat and or water quality. And I think building in that additional in-stream, well, I guess water quality is lower down, but I don't see anything problematic with that. But Steve, what's your comment? You're on mute.
I don't see anything problematic with adding that phrase there either, Brian. The thing that caught my eye here was that we've added in some additional agencies that might have water quality priorities, it says. But up above in the rules, it's specific to ODFW and DEQ water quality. And I just think we need to be consistent between different sections of the rules. If we're going to add them in here, we should probably mention them up above. And if we're going to add them in here, I also just thought, well, maybe we should mention parks, because they have the scenic waterway flows, and that might be a consideration in the future that people are trying to help meet scenic waterway flows. So I'm not sure how to resolve it, but it's something I noticed.
No, yeah, you're right. Oh, go ahead, Renee.
Well, I was just going to ask, I don't know if that was added in, Eric. I tend to agree with Steve. I know that ODF and ODA have a role in water quality, but it is a little bit awkward here compared to other places. Do you remember, Eric, why it was listed here. Is it because of like a connection to the technical review team as opposed to elsewhere where it's more kind of big, broad intent of the grant program? Do you recall?
Are you talking about like in the connection with like the coordinating and partnering with other funders?
Well, no, because like
section, or-
elsewhere we've got, oh, yes, that is where it, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That is where it currently is.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just be spitballing at this point and I really have to go back and look. I mean, I have this recollection, vague recollection of, you know, if we're going to be partnering with, coordinating with other funders, it needs to meet, you know, the criteria that are set out in these other programs specific to the agencies listed there, and that didn't carry over to this particular evaluation criterion. But I'd have to go back and
Okay.
spend some time, I think, looking at it.
Okay. Yeah, so Steve, we'll look into that because it is a little awkward. Thank you. Spencer, go ahead.
I was just going to note that inclusion of the in-stream flow restoration was just my attempt to link it to our forthcoming statewide prioritization.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I do agree that it's odd that, yeah, just this far down in the rules, we start mentioning Oregon Department of Agriculture and Oregon Department of Forestry. But yeah, we'll discuss that and have a proposed adjustment at our next RAC meeting. The next item is a potential addition of under letter D, ensures water in drought and or dry water years. And was curious to get people's feedback on that.
Well, it feels like there were some question marks from the prior mention of the dry year and drought conditions. Given like Spencer's comment on the perennial issue, but Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, that seems pretty strong to have as a, well, I guess it's one of many criteria, but there might be really valuable benefits to flows in 8 out of 10 years, but maybe it doesn't solve the hardest year. So just trying to understand how OEB would look at that, what this directs, how this directs them to view that.
So you think it might be too restrictive?
If it has to insure it, or is it just one of many things that they can qualitatively weigh? I think there's some good projects that may not solve the driest of the dry year problems that you'd want to still consider funding. And I think if you could craft that earlier, the earlier criteria about achieving flow goals, you know, that might be enough.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd be curious though to see where this came from or what the rationale was, since I wasn't here for the last conversation.
Yeah, just a comment that had come in about, you know, should we have something that really addresses these, you know, conditions and problematic years.
Well, and to be clear that what Kate, it wasn't talked about in the last RAC meeting. It was a separate comment that we received as we were embarking on rulemaking from an interested party. Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, in addition to what Kate just said, I think it might be problematic to actually evaluate that. You know, we're in a lot of data limited systems here. It's going to be tough to determine the actual situation and conditions during drought years.
That's a good point. Yeah, that could, yeah, especially if there's limited data in a low flow system. Okay, well, I think we'll discuss that and internally, and we may see that again at the next RAC or a modification to it. The next item, item E, promotes collaborative basin planning efforts, including efforts under the state integrated water resources strategy to protect and restore in-stream values. And it was just with the update to the IWRS, there, it would just be a place where we could call out that this project is addressing that, but there's certainly other state and federal plans that aren't called out specifically in criteria. So maybe it's not appropriate. But Kate, what do you think?
Oh, I'm sorry. My hand was a relic.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a strong opinion on this one. I like it.
Any other thoughts? Steve?
Well, this one really warmed my heart. I think it's nice. It doesn't exclude any other plans and what basin plans or anything, but I think it's a nice reference to the IWRS and sort of ties the state agencies together around what is our state water plan. So I think it makes sense from that standpoint. And to the extent that applicants can show how the project was derived from a collaborative planning process, I think that's good for the applicant and good for everybody. So I like it.
Thanks for that input. Any others? Not seeing any. We can move on to the next section, application evaluation process. And here the proposed change is in 1B4, deferring to staff or the board with an explanation if there's a policy issue or budget issue that we're proposing to delete that. And there is an opportunity when a application is reviewed and then a recommendation is made to the board, that includes to fund it, to not fund it, or to fund it with conditions. And if there's a policy issue or a budget issue, then that can either result in a project not getting funded, or there could be a condition that would address that. So there's just a recommendation to remove that section. Any comments? Not seeing any, and we can move on to the next. Is in D, the program, the technical review team may rank order of all projects, and that's just something that we wanted to maintain the ability to rank projects, knowing that there's going to be a time in the future where we'll have more applications coming in than funding available during that grant cycle, and having the ability to rank the order of projects would help with the board making a determination over which projects will get funded. And I'll put that out for discussion, or maybe others at OWEB might have a comment on that.
I think you explained it well, Brian.
Okay. Yep. All right. Any issues or concerns with either of those changes? Not seeing any.
And just for a quick explanation for folks, so we do have these kind of different tracks of it. Something can be board awarded. So the program that Brian administers, the Water Acquisition Grant Program, that's a board awarded program. We do have through, for example, our Focused Investment Partnership program, the board will allocate a big pot of funding to a certain FIP, and then it turns into a delegated process by which the board turns over their authority to the director to basically engage in project level application. So that's why there's this, you start to see these funky 2 tracks of board awarded or delegated, because we have these different mechanisms for funding. And so the vast majority, I think very few, if any, water acquisitions have come through FIPS, but we have to retain space for that because we have that as a programmatic option for folks.
Thanks, Renee. And then
So my hunch, Brian, is I'm going to ask this group, because we have 5 minutes. Maybe we stop here, because I'm not sure we can get far enough, but Heartsy, was that a thumbs up? Or was that a, okay, yes, okay. So maybe let's stop here. And I promise you we will get through the rest of it. I'm promising myself that too. At the next meeting, plus we'll have time for the substantive conversation. So it looks like, Kevin, you're still on the meeting. Do you have any interest in providing public comment? And if so, raise your hand and Meg can help us move you over. Okay.
And Meg, I did want to confirm that Kevin has the ability to raise his hand. Do we know that?
He should.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
Perfect. Great.
Great. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, Kevin, was that you confirming you can't raise your hand, or because you want to give public comment? Okay. Meg, can you move him over?
I am. All right. You should be able to speak.
I think, Kevin, you may need to unmute. It looks like your microphone is now enabled, but you might need to unmute.
Thank you.
How's that?
Yep, perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thanks, Meg.
I just came to listen to y'all doing some rulemaking. I just took a job in Veneta, and it seems to be the wetlands capital of Oregon, and so I'm going to be doing a lot of work in that area. We have some really beautiful oak savanna here, and I'd like to preserve that and the wetlands here. So figured I'd pop on here while I was doing some other stuff, just listen to y'all work.
Thank you, Kevin.
I'm gonna have to rely on y'all's experience when I get to this. So, you know, at some point, you know, you guys have the passion for this and the experience. You know, I have the passion to do these projects, but I don't have the knowledge that is clearly here, you know, with this board, and I hope to rely on that one day.
Well, thanks for spending time with us this afternoon. Hopefully it was informational and enlightening. And certainly there are some other OWEB grant programs that may be of interest and relevance to you, since you mentioned things like Oak Savannah and so, like some of the restoration grant offerings. So just keep an eye out for those too, information about those on the OWEB website. Okay, so I think you all have been troopers. We couldn't do rulemaking without this expert group. So we'll stop where we are, knowing we'll pick up the funding recommendation process. I think that much of the remaining rule set will move pretty quickly, and recognizing that we will want to hold some space to talk about some of those things like monitoring, because you all did have some thoughts about that. So the items that I've flagged for some deeper conversations in January, as I mentioned, groundwater dependent ecosystems, kind of closing the loop on all things infrastructure related, irrigation efficiency, irrigation modernization, programmatic costs. We will talk about some of the monitoring topics, I think, as we move through the rest of the rule set, but also I did hear some interest in January in talking about this priority date topic, and different considerations around that, and then kind of how we handle these newer initiatives, things that might be newer, not yet with rules adopted, maybe there won't be rules adopted. How do we not inadvertently preclude those? So If there are other topics though, and I'm not looking for additions, but if there are other things that you have on your mind that you feel like we really need to talk about this kind of in a big picture perspective, not in an individual line of rule, please do let Brian and me know. You can let us know now if you have those. But if you need to ponder it, just send us an email or give us a call and let us know, because I want to make sure we're protecting the right amount of time for it. I think at one point, Eric Hartstein, I believe that we were thinking, oh, maybe it'll be a 3-meeting RAC process. I've disabused myself of that notion, so hopefully, folks, you're okay with 4 meetings for this RAC process, because I think we'll need it. So I think as we look towards the February meeting, that will coincide with short legislative session. So if in April, I think about you in particular, but it could be that others will have less availability. So we will work hard to try to get something on the calendar soon. And knowing that we won't necessarily know things like when different when different Ways and Means subcommittees or policy committees are meeting. So just we're mindful of that potentially impacting some of your availability as we look into February. So Brian, Eric Hartstein, what other things would we like to check in with the group about before we wrap?
I think you got it.
I think just we'll spend some more time on that evaluation criteria that we discussed.
Yep. And we will try to get the next round of red lines out to you, hopefully within like 5 working days. I know this time was a little bit tighter. We have lots of balls in the air here. So thank you for your patience and not having a lot of time with them. We'll do some follow-up with Kaylin and Anton, and then hopefully we'll have everyone together at the January RAC meeting. So any final feedback for us, things that you need from us? Changes? Okay.
Well, thank
All
you.
right. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Greatly appreciate it.
Yep.
Have a wonderful
Thank you.
holiday season.
Have a good night.
Happy holidays.
Yep.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you, folks.
Do you want to go get some food?